Hi guys, it's Dylan from Bijou Diamond Jewellery in London with another watch video, and today we're taking a look at the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Chronograph. So as with all my reviews, let's go back in time and look at the history of this watch. I'm only going to look very briefly at the history of this Royal Oak. If you want to learn more in-depth history of how the Royal Oak came into the Audemars Piguet collection, then go check out my Royal Oak extra thin review. That's going to look much more in depth at why Audemars Piguet introduced it. But during this review, I'll look very basically at the history. So if we're going to go back in time now to the late 1960s, specifically 1969, which is when Seiko released the quartz watch. It's a brand new form of movement for watchmaking. It featured an electronic movement. It was incredibly reliable, incredibly accurate also. It was much cheaper than the Swiss mechanical equivalents. And so many people started buying the quartz watches from Seiko. And as a result of that, the attention on Swiss watches, fine Swiss watches with mechanical movements really dropped, and then sales for those companies really dropped massively. So brands like Audemars Piguet suffered hugely from reduction in sales. So they really needed to come up with something special in order to generate new sale, new interest in the Swiss watch industry. So Audemars Piguet enlisted the help in 1972, or actually it was 1971, enlisted the help of a watch designer called Genta to create something completely brand new for the industry, something that they had never seen before. They knew they had to create something really unique in order to bring people back and realize why it was worth spending the extra money on a proper Swiss watch with a mechanical movement. So they invented or created the first steel sports watch that was finished to an exceptionally high standard. In fact, it was finished to a higher standard than certain dress watches, which was just never seen before on a sports watch, let alone on a steel sports watch. It's incredibly difficult to do. In fact, it was so difficult that the first prototype they made when they released the watch initially was actually in white gold, because they didn't have the sufficient tools and techniques to be able to create it and machine it in steel. The watch featured incredibly complex finishing, incredibly complex combination of polished and brushed finishes. The attention to detail was incredible, and again, like I said, never been seen before on any steel sports watch. The watch was incredibly expensive though, kind of 10 times as expensive as an equivalent sports watch from another brand, like Rolex, for example, like a Submariner. So it was extremely expensive, much more so in fact than some dress watches as well. So they didn't do so well at first, but people realized as the years went on why they were such a unique, special watch, and that's when they picked up sale, in terms of sales. The design of the watch was inspired by dive helmets, ship portholes. The bolts on the outside of the bezel that you can see on this watch are inspired by that, and the rubber gasket around the edge of the bezel as well, kind of inspired by ship portholes and dive helmets, old-fashioned dive helmets. The watch obviously has a nautical theme. The watch's name is Royal Oak, which is named after 8 British naval ships, and that's why we have an octagonal bezel, obviously, each side for each ship. So Genta definitely designed the watch with a nautical theme in mind. So that's kind of the history of the actual Royal Oak and how the Royal Oak came out. But we're going to look at some brief history on the actual chronograph Royal Oaks. So the first chronograph Royal Oak was released in 1997. That was a reference 25860. That was a 39mm Royal Oak chronograph. The complications before that for the Royal Oak were much more dressy. They're much more oriented to a much more dressy style of complication, for example, like a jewel time or a perpetual calendar. Nothing really sporty in terms of complications like a chronograph. So this was quite an important watch for the Royal Oak line. Later on, Audemars Piguet introduced the reference 26300, also a 39mm, slightly updated dials and strap, bracelet, sorry, just a few other updates on that watch. But then the major update came in 2012, which is when we saw the reference 26320, which was the 41mm Royal Oak chronograph. And that was to mark the 40th anniversary of the Royal Oak. So Audemars Piguet really wanted to revamp the whole Royal Oak line, and they did so by increasing the size from 39mm to 41mm. They also introduced a 37mm watch as well for people who wanted a slightly smaller case size. It was a big important watch, that 26320. It was incredibly popular and still is one of the most popular models. But a few years later on, in 2017, to mark the 20th anniversary of the Royal Oak chronograph, they released the 26331 reference, which is what we're looking at today. and that features some brand new dials, a few other little updates to the watch. A really, really beautiful watch. And yeah, let's dive into it now and have a look at the features on this piece. So we're going to start with the clasp as always. The clasp on this watch is one of my favorite clasps of all watches in the industry. In fact, I would probably say it's the best clasp available. It is a double deployment clasp. It's also extremely low profile. We can see how it doesn't actually protrude really out from the bracelet at all. And that means that it doesn't catch on anything, you know, like a table or when you're at work on your desk. It tends not to catch on anything because it doesn't protrude at all. Something like a Rolex Oyster clasp protrudes out from the bracelet, and therefore it's much easier to scratch it and dink it, whereas this, you won't have that issue. It also doesn't break up that beautiful design of that bracelet. It's very in keeping with the bracelet, and so that's kind of mainly why I love this bracelet, this clasp so much, is because that bracelet is so stunning. It would be such a shame to have, you know, something chunky in between that would ruin that look. So yeah, twin trigger, deployment clasp, incredibly solid, beautifully machined. I'd say easily the best clasp and one of the most comfortable clasps in the industry. Next, moving on to our bracelet, we have our exceptional Royal Oak bracelet, finished pretty much all in brushed finish. We've got these little mini plots between each link to link each of the actual links, and then our major plots at the top where the lug is to connect the bracelet to the actual lugs of the watch. The amazing thing and the revolutionary thing about this bracelet when it was released in the 70s was the fact that it featured all these flat links. And that's how Gerald Genta created such an incredible piece of jewellery out of this watch, is because the light shimmers off this watch like it does with the facets of a diamond. Because they're flat surfaces, it doesn't shine, it sort of shimmers, and it creates this incredible sparkle. And the fact he's used brush finish as well makes it even more lively, because if it was polished, you might lose some of that sheen. You know, generally if it is a full polished bracelet, you lose the definition and the contrast, whereas brush finish really helps to create that contrast between the light and the dark. So yeah, incredibly special bracelet. As you can see on screen now, it is absolutely stunning to look at. It's finished to an exceptional level with beautiful polished bevel edges. In between each plot is polished as well. So yeah, incredibly detailed. I'd say by far the best bracelet in the industry, better than the Aquanaut bracelets and the Nautilus bracelets in my opinion. I don't think any other bracelet comes close to this. It's also extremely comfortable as well, so that's just an added plus. Next, moving on to our case, we've got a 41mm case size on this watch. The fact it's a chronograph makes it wear slightly larger than that, more like 42, 43mm, depending on what brand you're comparing it to. The case is also a little bit deeper than something like a 15500 or maybe a 15202, like an extra thin. Because it's a chronograph, it has to have slightly a deeper case to accommodate that slightly different movement. And it works really well with this more sporty design of the watch. The bracelet is also slightly thicker than like a 15400, 15500 bracelet, again to accommodate for the slightly larger case to make sure everything's proportional. So the case is pretty much all brushed finish. We have a few polished accents across the case, which really help to highlight just some of the bold, beautiful angular lines this watch has. I think it's exceptionally finished, and I'd say it's probably one of the most beautiful cases in the industry. Doesn't really matter what Royal Oak you're looking at, they are all absolutely stunning to look at. Moving now up onto our bezel, we've got a steel bezel with a polished finish on the edges of the bezel, and then a brush finish on top. And our screws are 8 screws around the bezel, are all 18 karat white gold as a nod to the original watch that was made, the original prototype, which was made in 18 karat white gold. Now moving on to our dial, which is probably our best bit about this watch. This watch features the absolutely stunning blue dial with the silver subdials. It is such a beautiful dial. When you get this watch in some sunlight, or catch it in some sunlight, it looks absolutely stunning. You know, the watch really comes to life and gives it such presence. But those silver subdials create a little bit of contrast and a little bit of pop, gives it a little bit more character than the old all blue dial, the 26320 blue dial, which I really love about this watch. They've kind of updated that. The blue dial is also slightly a different tone of blue as well. It's got a bit more sheen than the older references. This one features a bit more of a shine and shimmer about it, with that tapisserie dial as well. Yeah, so I'd definitely say that my favorite feature about this watch is that blue dial, and it kind of has this sunburst effect, the way that if you get it in that certain sunlight, it really comes to life and you get this gorgeous blue tone. And obviously blue watches at the moment, blue dial watches are incredibly popular. This one is no exception. It's absolutely stunning, and it's pretty hard to get hold of as well. Okay, so that concludes the features of this watch. Onto whether or not I would own this piece. I would 100% own this watch. I personally prefer going for slightly smaller watches like a 39mm Royal Oak, but this one is absolutely stunning. On my wrist, which is 16.5 centimeters in circumference, this watch features beautifully, sits really beautifully on my wrist. It suits me really nicely. I think probably if you could wear this watch from a wrist circumference range of about 15 centimeters all the way up to 22 centimeters, I don't think there's really an upper limit for this watch. Usually I wouldn't go for a watch that wears this large, but because it wears so nicely on my wrist, I would definitely consider owning this piece. So I think that's a wonderful thing about this Royal Oak chronograph, and actually a lot of the Royal Oaks, is the fact that they really do suit such a wide range of wrists. I'd say maybe the chronograph more so than something like the plain 15500, because the 15500 has a very plain dial. It can appear very large and like an expansive watch, a very dinner plate style looking watch, not much going on, whereas the details and so much, the more busy dial and the chronograph pushes draws your eyes towards the center of the watch, and that helps to make it not appear so large. So I think in a way the chronograph suits a wider range of wrists than the non-chrono. So yeah, I would definitely own this watch. I love the 39mm as well. I think this one is probably my favorite dial variant of all the Royal Oak chronographs available. In fact, I'd say I prefer this steel Royal Oak chrono with the blue dial over all the other rose gold chronographs as well. So thanks guys for watching. Let us know in the comments if you've got any questions about this watch, what other Audemars Piguets you'd like us to review. And as always, if you're interested in this watch, then don't hesitate to contact us. Our details are in the description and also the end of the video. It'd be a pleasure to call this watch into stock for you.